Viewers, you'd remember earlier this year when the AIB report emerged following the Ahmedabad Air India plane crash. The focus was firmly on issues pertaining to the fuel cut-off switches. Foreign media chose to quickly run away with a narrative that pinned the blame on the pilots for deliberately shutting off the fuel cut-off switches. This narrative has come under a lot of criticism from the government as well as the families of the victims. Now, a lawyer representing families of those who were killed in the devastating Air India crash, Mike Andrews, has dismissed these claims that the pilots may have deliberately or mistakenly shut off fuel controls before the aircraft plunged into the ground. Mike Andrews says that the suggestion of self-sabotage or pilot error is not only unsupported by evidence but also unjust to the dead. So why exactly did the foreign media jump the gun, and what's the reasoning behind Mike Andrews' claims? Let's find out.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
A lot has been spoken about the possible theories for the cause of the tragic Air India plane that crashed in Ahmedabad. But really, is the preliminary report something that can be believed? Is there a lot more to it? To talk about this, we have Mike Andrews, an attorney for the families of more than 100 victims, who's joining us for his understanding of the events as they've transpired. Mr. Andrews, thank you so much for speaking to us here at Times Now. As a lawyer representing the families of the Air India crash victims, could you start by sharing what motivated you to take on this case and what your primary goals are in terms of seeking justice and accountability?
Sure, and thank you for having me. Our motivation is simply answers, transparency, and accountability. The families have obviously earned the right to know exactly what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. And then if parties are to be held responsible, we intend to assist with that. Our work in previous crashes has been to uncover the root cause of any failure in aviation. And as you know, aviation safety affects everyone. And so our goal here, first and foremost, is to learn exactly what happened, how and why.
Right. Some experts have pointed to the sequence of the fuel cutoff switches and the cockpit audio to suggest that the crash may have stemmed from deliberate actions taken in the cockpit, potentially even suicide. But you are rejecting any such insinuation that's coming out of the AIB report. Tell us why.
Well, you know, we've said pretty consistently that anyone who would seek to automatically blame the pilots is without full information is simply conjecture and speculation. Obviously, very small decontextualized excerpts of flight data were released in the initial report. Those releases tend to focus only on this fuel switch issue without giving more information in the context. Also, it did not explicitly blame the pilots. It was just released in conjunction with other comments that were made that were apparently leaked in the United States regarding a conversation in the cockpit of why did you turn off or why did you switch off, and the other pilot responding, I did not. Those two comments and pieces of data are taken out of context and need the full amount of data in order to understand exactly what's happening there. We know that there are other potential issues here with this aircraft that could be at fault.
Right. And Mr. Andrews, you've argued that the aircraft had been dogged by other technical concerns. You've also talked about its portable water system, for instance, that supplies safe drinking water for passengers and crew, and its proximity to sensitive electronics. You said that even if it doesn't ruin the component, it can trigger a reset, and that can then cascade and initiate an engine shutdown. Why would you think that this is a more compelling theory?
Well, we believe that, first of all, we need the data to understand exactly what happened. So we're working from potential theories of what could have happened here. Knowing the bits and pieces of information that we do have from both the preliminary report as well as comments by the survivor regarding lights flickering on and off just prior to the crash, Additionally, the video that shows the deployment of the rat and what we understand to be prior to the timeline of the switch involvement, all of those things to us indicate it is more likely that there's an electrical issue on board this plane. Now, when we look at prior FAA documents and Boeing documents, going back to 2016, but certainly the final FAA bulletin was issued in December of 24 and was to take effect 6 days after our crash, speaks directly to manufacturing problems with the 787 with respect to the failure to install waterproofing in key areas above electronic equipment bays, improperly installed or defective and leaking couplings. For example, we have one here. This is a clamshell coupling that fits around water lines on board the aircraft. We understand that these couplings were determined to leak at times into areas that can cause electrical equipment to become wet. And this is not speculation or conjecture. This is actually based on field reports that are cited within the FAA documents. So we know that there are issues on board the 787 with respect to water, and that's coming directly from FAA and Boeing documents. We know that Boeing has apparently compiled an over 200-page report on how to replace those couplings and the safer designs that are to be used, as well as additional waterproofing. Now, because those leaks are in areas that have in the past run into the electronic equipment in the EE bays, both fore and aft, and right now we're talking about an area of the aircraft that would roughly be here behind the trailing edge of the wings and across the middle of the aircraft in the aft section. But what we're talking about is the potential for electric shorts in those areas, and specifically what the FAA has said is that if not addressed, and they're referring to the defective couplings and sealant, the equipment in the EE bays can become wet, can result in an electrical short, and potential loss of system functions essential for safe flight. So we believe that narrative fits more closely with the evidence that we've seen so far.
That's very, very significant, and as you say, this is documented, but how do we look at this? Is this a design defect? Is it more of a manufacturing defect or a flaw? How do we look at this particular coupling device that you're talking about?
Great questions. So one of the questions that was posed in the notice of proposed rulemaking report from the FAA asked that question. And initially they said the couplings were defective. They also then went on to say, well, it could be an installation issue. And so they've mentioned both. It could be an installation and or coupling design. What we do know is that based on the Boeing documents and the FAA documents, it appears that once these couplings are installed in the aircraft, protective shrouds are installed in place around them. It's a split shroud design. And the documents refer to the possibility that the shroud, once it is placed in place, can interfere with the latches on the coupling and can cause it to uncouple. One of the other things we're looking at currently is the potential for the couplings to appear to be latched but not be latched. Because as you can tell now, this coupling appears to be latched. It is not, in fact, latched, because all you have to do is just pull slightly on it and it can open. So it looks like if you're only focusing on the coupling issue, it could be either a design issue or an installation/application issue. Additionally, though, the FAA documents speak to the failure of Boeing to install proper waterproofing in the areas above these EE bays to protect the equipment. So it appears to me to be a combination of issues originating with water coming from the couplings, but allowed to seep into the EE bays as a result of failure to properly waterproof.
Right. You've also raised concerns about lithium-ion batteries in the tail section and their vulnerability to water leaks. Can you explain what are the kind of risks this poses and how this might connect to the failure that we've seen in this particular crash?
So one of the things that we've seen, and this has been reported in various settings, we'll all remember the photographs of the wreckage with the aft tail section left sort of sticking out of the end of the top of the medical building. And in that area, there were photographs of what we believe to be an APU with its separate independent battery source. If that is correct, it looks like it may have damage, burn damage that may or may not be consistent with the burn from the aircraft post-crash. The concern there is whether or not something that's known as a thermal runaway or an event that occurs within the battery, whether or not that could have happened prior to and initiated a short of some sort, resulting in the reset of the engines.
Right. You also filed a request of the FOIA as far as the flight data recording data is concerned. How are you looking at this in terms of the request being denied or delayed, and what are the legal options to get this particular data? How crucial can this be in the final analysis?
Sure. So you're referring to a FOIA or an FOIA request in the United States. That's the Freedom of Information Act request. We did file that to the FAA because our understanding through reporting in the media is that data may have been provided by Air India or the AAIB board to the FAA in the United States. And that's not unusual for that to happen. We think the boxes themselves were retained in India, but a copy of the data may have been provided to the FAA. Because of that, we filed a request to the FAA to produce that because, again, the crucial point here is to understand the timeline of the electrical sequence. What caused this RAT device to deploy? The RAT, of course, is the ram air turbine auxiliary power unit that deploys out from under the bottom, underneath the plane. And so far, we've received an acknowledgement from the FAA that they received our request, but no information has been produced so far.
Right. The sole survivor of this crash has mentioned the flickering of lights and unusual behavior just after takeoff. How does this eyewitness account influence your understanding of the sequence of events, especially in relation to these possible electrical faults that you're talking about?
Yeah, and that is a key data point for us because flickering lights on and off or changing colors indicate a problem with the electrical system. One possibility for that, if there has been a general short or a failure in the electrical system because of water or some other issue, our understanding of the electrical architecture is such that when this plane suffers a power failure, and keep in mind, this aircraft was billed as one of the most electrically advanced and computer-driven aircraft ever. Okay, there's tons of electrically operated equipment and computers in this plane. So our understanding is that if it suffers an overall power failure, the sequence is to switch from the main power bus or the main power system over to an emergency or backup system. When that occurs, you can have a lag in the electrical system. That may be what Mr. Ramesh was talking about when he spoke to the BBC and said he saw the lights flickering on and off. We also know that that's potentially what the pilots are referring to in the cockpit voice conversation that's been reported in the media. The question becoming, are they referring to the fuel switches, or are they referring to control panels in the cockpit which may have gone dark as a result of this changeover? Again, we don't know until we get this crucial flight data recorder evidence.
Right. Also, you've mentioned that Beasley Island has its own investigation, apparently, that's being conducted into this crash. How far along is that investigation?
Well, obviously, our investigation is continuing, and that's what's allowed us to have the information to bring to you today, in fact. We're looking at the couplings. We're looking at the prior notices by the FAA and Boeing. And we're also looking at what could potentially be similar incidents that have occurred with the 787, not resulting in a crash, but issues that raise concerns. For example, July the 25th of this year, a flight from Dulles Airport in the U.S. bound for Munich suffered an engine loss, a loss of power in one engine after takeoff. That plane was able to circle, come back and land without crash. No one was injured, and the pilots were not blamed. About 6 days later, another flight, 787, from Los Angeles bound for Santiago, had a RAT, or the ram air turbine, to deploy upon takeoff. Now, that is only supposed to happen if there are some failures, if something has happened to go wrong to call for that. That plane also circled, came back and landed. The pilots were not blamed, as far as we know. Those two incidents in and of themselves are concerning, in addition to a 2019 incident involving a 787, which upon landing suffered a dual-engine power failure, which was later attributed to a software fault in the TCMA, or the throttle control malfunction accommodation system. So we know that there are potential issues because you have water leaks, and you also have computer systems here that are somewhat autonomous in that they can call for automated or uncommanded changes to flight settings and power settings.
Right. You've also confirmed that there are 4 individuals with what you describe as vital technical and engineering information who've contacted your team without compromising their confidentiality. Can you share with us the type of issues that these individuals have pointed out that may have been overlooked by the official investigation so far?
So we are regularly, during any case like this, regularly contacted by individuals who feel that they can offer value in terms of the investigation or based on specialized knowledge that they have had. Sometimes, in this case, they have pointed to engineering or manufacturing issues. They've pointed to analysis of the videotape coverage of the plane upon takeoff and what things may or may not tend to show there. And they've pointed to some of the issues that we've spoken about today, particularly with the timeline for the RAT and what that means for which initiating event could predate that and could have caused that.
All right, Mike Andrews, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.
Thank you for having me.